Hi, in case you don't know me, I'm Steph. I'm a personal branding coach, and I provide the strategy and energy to up-level your personal brand and attract your soulmate clients. Today, we are talking about elevator pitches. I'm super excited about this because I think it's really important to move your business forward and nail this down for your personal brand. Let's get started. Why an elevator? Why an elevator pitch? These are also known as one-liners and taglines. It's information that's delivered to us in 1 to 2 sentences that describes what you do. Usually you see them in like your Instagram profiles, on your Facebook page, and most importantly, a lot of times when you're in networking meetings, that's the only time you have to really talk about yourself. So when I first started getting into networking and launched my business full time, this was something that took me a really long time to nail down and be able to deliver with ease. And even then, like it would change, but it was just so important to captivate somebody's attention in such a short amount of time that would get them to want to talk to you later. And especially in networking situations like on Zoom calls, when you really only have 30 seconds to grab those people's attention, you want something that's going to be like, okay, I need to talk to this person further. And it's the same for things like your Instagram profile, where people land on your Instagram profile or your Facebook page or your YouTube page, and you really only have 10 to 15 seconds for them to read one thing, and then they're moving on. So that one-liner is so important in your personal brand. They need to be super quick, easy to remember, and easy to say so that once you've practiced it a few times, you can get it out there quite easily. And as I said, it needs to entice someone to really want to know more about you. What it does is it gives direction in problems that you solve, and it also can support your occupational title. So if you are a realtor and having this one liner and who you work with, they can work hand in hand in helping people realize if you're the right person for them to work with. And the nice thing about your one liner is it can change more regularly to suit shifts in your business or refine your soulmate clients. So, some people keep their one-liners and their little bios for years. Other people change it every couple months, and other people use 2 or 3 variations depending on their audience. For example, I may use a slightly different one if I am in an in-person networking meeting versus something like my Instagram profile. It's nice that you can change this more regularly as opposed to some people who change their job title just as frequently is not a good idea. So this is such a great way to really focus on what you're talking about in your marketing right now, and also just really give people an idea of who you are. So a good example is I started this video off with mine, and it's just so simple and to the point, but it takes a little finessing to get it exactly how you want to have it. But for example, I said, hi, I'm Steph. I'm a personal branding coach, and I provide the strategy and energy to up-level your personal brand and connect to your soulmate clients. So the first part, the hi, I'm Steph. I'm a personal branding coach. These usually go hand in hand with your one-liner, but this is just as if I was giving somebody a handshake and telling them what I was doing or what I do. They can work together, as I mentioned, but sometimes they might end up being a little separate from each other. So, if you're in a situation where you've been introduced, somebody might not introduce you exactly word for word with this, so you wouldn't necessarily turn around and repeat yourself. On the flip side, sometimes describing what you are, like maybe you only have the opportunity to say, hi, I'm Louise, I'm a realtor. So they can be separate, but most of the time when we consider an elevator speech or an online presence of a personal brand in general, they do come hand in hand, and they really do support each other. And one thing that I really like to mention to people is if your elevator pitch is if your occupational title or professional title is super vague, you want your elevator pitch to be incredibly concise to make up for that. And what I mean by like a title that's vague is if you take something like a mortgage broker, that's pretty obvious what somebody does, or like a business coach is pretty obvious what somebody does. But somebody like a transformational coach or like nutritional guide, things that have a little bit more wiggle room in what it actually means, or some people who have very, very unique titles. I have a friend who has a very unique title, and it's very like, you have no idea what it means until she describes it further. So she has to have a really strong elevator pitch to deliver instantly when somebody asks what she does. So all in all, you want to make sure that they go really well together and that they support each other. Somebody like a mortgage broker or a realtor could have a little bit more fluffy elevator pitch, and who more directed towards more their soulmate clients, and given more the warm and fuzzies, because most people, I think, know what a realtor does in general. Okay, so this process is not just guesswork either. You can take the time to just randomly throw something out there, see if it sticks. But I've always found that that doesn't quite convey enough information for people. And it also just, it becomes a lot easier for you to question if it's working. Then that's harder for you to deliver it, because you're like, am I even saying enough information? That kind of thing. So I like to walk through this process with my clients and myself, even, to make sure that I am capturing a lot of what I want to say in this most precious one line. So to build that captivating elevator speech, it's best to start really big and narrow down to getting specific, because we want intentional messaging, and we want something that captures enough of what you do while still simplifying it enough that it's in literally one, max 2 lines. I would even say it's very rare that it would be 2 lines unless they're very short sentences. And so to do this, we write out everything you do in your business. This is nice to do by hand, if that resonates with you, or if when I say by hand, you just shrink up and you're like, no. So you can type this. You do want to type it in like Word document or something like that. It's just nice to do it handwritten sometimes, because when we physically write with our hands, a lot of times more information does come out of our brain, and especially our unconscious side of things. And so you want to write absolutely everything you do in your business, everything you want people to feel when you work together, the problems you solve, who your soulmate client is, how you fit into the process, and anything else that just really comes to mind. That if you were having an hour-long conversation with somebody, what are some of the things that you would talk about if you were trying to explain what you do in your business? So this is your opportunity for the people who really like to talk a lot and who are those chatty people when describing your business, to just really write everything out, like everything you can think of. And this is an opportunity to just really, like, for lack of a better term, word vomit. So, you can go beyond what I've prompted here for questions, but these will help you get your brain going in the right direction. And then from that, we want to refine. So after you have at least a few paragraphs, I have had people do a couple pages, depending on how big you write. But for the most part, you want at least a few paragraphs, as if you were writing like a very convincing essay about what you do in your work and who you are, that kind of thing. So once you have that, one of the nice things about if it's handwritten is it's really easy to start refining, because you can cross things off and just really see things pop off the page a little bit easier. You could also, if you do prefer to type, print this out, double space it, and then start crossing stuff off. Or if you're doing it in a Word document, I like to use the actual markup tool of crossing things off rather than just deleting, because as you go through this process, you might decide like, oh, I actually needed to keep that. Oh, I just need to keep that, but rewrite it, that kind of thing. You don't want to completely just start deleting absolutely everything. And as you go through this process of refining, you want to cross out any fluffy language. So overly descriptive things like lots of adjectives or adverbs, unless it really, really feels super important. But for the most part, when we get chatty and over explaining, we tend to explain a little bit too much. So if you find that you're like reading through and you're like, okay, this actually isn't that important information, it's just more that refining or like more building on what you actually do. And that's the kind of stuff that you talk about when people want to know more about you. But for the purposes of your one liner, cut it. Cut anything that you've said more than once. And as you go through this, it's totally an intuitive gut feeling process. So we're not overthinking. We're just like, nope, that doesn't fit. Nope, that seems too much. Nope, carry on, right? And so we want to narrow it down to 3 or 4 sentences. You might have to go through this process a couple times. You know, maybe I like to fire through the very first time and be like, okay, talk too much there, got rid of that. And maybe I'll narrow down to about like 5 to 8 sentences. And then from that, I'll narrow it down again. And as a bonus, and one of the reasons why I suggest not necessarily just to delete it on your computer, is that this is actually a great way to grab some content too. So as you had written through this process, you've probably written out a lot of stuff that you could maybe talk about in your content. So just grab that and put it on another piece of paper or write it down somewhere, just so you have it later, because this process in general is a great way to just create some content that's really from your soul and what you want people to know about your business. So from that, we want to polish this 3 to 4 sentences down to that really nice refined sentence. I like to create 2 to 3 one-sentence statements that declare what you do, so that you can like say them out loud, you know, maybe even run them by a few people and what seems to resonate the most, and just cycle them through. Or even maybe you want to create one for in-person marketing, one for your Instagram, and all your online marketing, and then, you know, one for environments that aren't as business related. So, you know, the whole point of an elevator speech is that you need to be able to tell somebody in that 30-second elevator ride. So that also means a grocery lineup, Starbucks, anytime where somebody, you might get an opportunity to quickly explain what you do. And as you practice this more and more, you might find yourself using this more and more and actually making more cool connections in the world. So we're narrowing it down to those 2 to 3 one-sentence statements. If you want to just do one and then tweak it later to fit different environments, that's totally cool too. And if you're great with words, and have narrowed it down, then that's awesome. But if you are walking through this and you're just like, I have no idea what I need in this statement, I like to use this formula as just a rough template, replace the words that you need to replace. But if you start simply with, I help blank, which is simplified soulmate client. Like if you were to describe your soulmate client in literally 1 to 3 words, what would that be? Like a very umbrella term behind it. And then you want to say, work through their biggest challenge so they can, and then you insert their desired results by doing your method or process. This is a great way to start really exploring how you can talk about your business in one line and still cover a lot of what you need to cover, especially who you work with, what you help them do from A to B, and how you help them. That's basically what this formula works through. And as an example here, I posted, for example, I help stay-at-home moms work through their meal planning so that they can have more time for themselves by providing easy recipes. This is a little clunky in the language. I just threw it in based on this formula. So what you would want to do is just maybe massage that a little bit later. This is even great if you want to take it to somebody else can wordsmith a little bit better. You know, I help clients massage this all the time. Or maybe you just have a friend who's a little better with words, right? So but you've already gone through the process of refining this down, because only you know your business the best. So you need to walk through this process. Anytime I do this with a client, I have to get them to do it, and we do it together, or I get them to do it first and then we refine it after, because only you know what's going to feel good inside you to get out and reach those soulmate clients. So as I said, rearrange this to sound smoother, but this little formula will help you get all the information that you needed to grab from that word vomiting process. So then I like to refine and polish a little bit further by asking some of these questions to myself. Does this statement give enough information about what I do? If you like, it's great to take these sentences out into the real world for somebody who has no idea what you do, and rattle it off and like ask them, does that give you enough information, or at least entice you to figure out what I do? And then you ask yourself, is this statement easy for me to remember and repeat? The truth is, the more effective it is if you can say it on the fly. If you're having to bring out a notepad just to give somebody an elevator speech, that's not going to be very effective. And then you ask yourself, does this statement generate enough interest for someone to ask me more? So it should be a statement that feels very like, ooh, that's interesting, tell me more. That's literally the whole point, and it's supposed to be enticing. So if it's just very vanilla and it's just, you know, I help moms create better meal plans, that might entice people a little bit, because they're like, oh, but it's also kind of very vanilla. Lots of people do that, right? So by throwing in what their challenge is, you know, you start resonating a little bit more with what they're going through, right? Or if, you know, you have a realtor and it's like, I sell houses to people who are who are in blah 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 area, right? Yeah, you and like probably 100 other people. So what is enticing me to ask you more about your business? And then that brings me to probably a question that most people won't consider, but I think is equally as important. Is this statement refined to my soulmate client enough that some people should not be interested in? Your statement shouldn't be, or your one-liner or your elevator speech, whatever you want to call it, shouldn't be so enticing that absolutely every single person will ask you more. Because if your target audience is, you know, middle-aged men who are looking to make a change in their life, you know, you don't want a teenage girl to be asking you more about the business so much. Like maybe if they were genuinely interested, but if it was such a vague statement and you're like, okay, well, that doesn't make sense, then that's a wasting of, or not necessarily a wasting, but a use of your energy that might not be appropriate or even just worth your time. So the statement needs to pique the interest of who you actually want to pique the interest of, or at least somebody who might know somebody who could be your soulmate client. So I love walking through these questions just to refine things a little bit more, and a check-in point that I'm covering enough things in that one-liner. So if that all is clear as mud and you still need help, I'm sure it's once you actually walk through the process, it's quite simple, and just take some time and reflection on what you do. And by starting big and moving small, then a lot of people have that personality that they want to cover absolutely everything. So then they actually don't end up covering anything. So this process will help you refine that one-liner so that it's a little bit more useful for you. And so I like to test these out on people who it makes sense for. I run a monthly mastermind, which if you're watching this, a lot of you are in this group. And we purposely practice this every meeting so that you get a chance to get some feedback on it. And so I encourage you to test this out in situations like that. And you can post your one-liner in the Soulmate Client Society community forum. There's a section there that's a general audience, and no matter who watches this video, you can pop one-liner information in there. Or if you feel like you really just want to work through this, you can book a coaching call with me. And if it's specific off one of these videos, then we do a little power coaching call that's a little bit shorter, and then we just focus on this one thing. I hope that's helpful. I'd love to see your one-liners out there in the world, and leave a comment on this video if you found it useful. And yeah, I can't wait to share some more tips with you about your personal brand. Have a good day.